So normally we start every show with the cold open, a little funny. We've talked about this before. Today we're not going to be funny. Today is really our opportunity to reach out to our student athlete friends and their families out there. We want to talk about NIL. We've kind of done a prelude to this on Twitter. But this is one of the biggest questions or subject matter, topics that we've seen over the last probably 13 years of doing this show, in terms of what the whispers are, what the concerns are, etc. We couldn't even find an AD really to come on camera until we finally thought, hey, Trine's putting out a lot of material, and we'll talk about our guests coming up in a little bit. But they're too scared, some of them, to come on camera right now because they don't want to say the wrong thing or have it come back to haunt them along the way. And JB, I understand it to a certain degree after watching kind of the Wild West scenario begin to play out with name, image, likeness, or NIL.
Yeah, and similar to COVID, every state, every school, every conference, every place is kind of developing their own rules and regulations on how to handle this. And there are some interesting and kind of frightening consequences for student athletes if they make the wrong decisions and they maybe sign up with the wrong place, or they don't file taxes, or this and that. It could affect a whole number of different factors. So this is kind of an educational video, you can say. Unfortunately, we have a pretty great cast of characters to help us teach parents, student athletes, even administrators, or whoever else might be tuning in, about what this whole NIL thing really means for the future of the NCAA and college athletics.
We're going to look at the concerns. We're going to look at some best practices. We're going to talk to people that really have their hands and fingers on the heartbeat of this entire situation. Coming up here on this special edition of Season 13 of In the Huddle. Okay, we don't want to waste much time here at the beginning of the show. We want to tell you, though, that coming up, I'm going to name a couple here, and then I'm going to let JB fill in the blanks because I always screw this up and forget somebody along the way. But in this show, we're going to start with an interview with NCAA's Interim Vice President for Division III, that is Louise McCleary. Great interview with her to discuss NIL and where the NCAA is at in terms of both rules and administration of rules, ultimately. In other words, the effects on people that might make mistakes along the way. A lot of open questions will remain after that interview, but you need to hear it to understand where things are going. Then we're going to have Matt Land, who is the athletic director at Trine University. As we said in the cold open, they are ahead of the curve a little bit in terms of getting some of the materials out that they want their student athletes to see to understand what the school's rules are and what they can and can't do or should or shouldn't do at this point. JB, I'll let you take the next two.
Yeah, and then following AD Land will be Lyle Adams, who is the CEO of a company called Spry. He's a former NCAA Division I athlete from Wake Forest, ironically also from my hometown here of Orlando. But Lyle has started a company to help advise young student athletes and their families and colleges, universities on some of the possible, pitfalls and a lot of the I's and T's that need to be dotted and crossed throughout this process. And finally, and probably most interestingly, maybe to some of the younger viewers, is actually a student athlete, Caleb, aka D3FB, a senior wide receiver at East Texas Baptist, is going to come on. He was one of the first, probably the first, at least from what I could see from Twitter, Division III athlete to sign with a NIL company or deal, and we get his perspective on things to wrap it up.
Let's jump in here. We have come up with 6 categories of concerns that we want to talk about up front here, and we'll run them on the screen as we talk about them. We're going to go briefly on each. Some of them are very self-explanatory, so let's go. What is this NIL concern list, basically, that we're hearing from the ADs, from student athletes, from administrators out there? here's what we've kind of broken it down to. Again, not an exhaustive list, but it's at least some things to think about. First, most NCAA regulations don't rely on this many sources, including state law, NCAA rules, and school rules. Normally, we talk about the NCAA regulations themselves, and then the school kind of just falls in line with them, or the conference, or in the school, or whatever. This is a case where there are so many different pieces of information that you have to consider that it's unique. It's extremely unique in this respect. And that's something you got to understand when we say, do your due diligence, do your due diligence. That's the reason why. There are so many questions and landmines along the way that you need to be cognizant of it. I'm also going to go to number 2 here. Every school is working independently on their own approach, meaning we're far from universal rules or best practices. JB, I think that's where the Wild West mentality has come from here.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's going to be a challenge, particularly given the fact that in D3 you have schools all the way from as far up as Bangor, Maine, to across the country to Tacoma, Washington, down to Southern California, all the way to Georgia. So it's going to change all across the country. It's going to be different rules for different schools, and that's going to be a challenge. And that's why you'll hear later on sometimes getting some professional opinions in on this that no state law is a really key part of the process.
Let's go to number 3. Most schools cannot provide full tutorials to their student athletes until the fall semester. Having this all come out in the summer, we talked to Louise McCleary about it a little bit here. It's something that obviously has vexed these schools because they've had to stop everything. The July 4th week is normally a very quiet week at schools, but it turned into kind of a hellacious time for some of them because they needed to scurry to make sure their student athletes didn't make the wrong decisions right off the bat. But what level of control do they have over them until they get there for fall semester? So this is something that's a huge concern for a lot of schools. Also, number 4, mistakes by student athletes could cost them their eligibility, and NIL violations may be easy for other schools to flag to the NCAA. Now, a lot of folks we talk to are saying we don't want to do the gotcha thing here. We don't want to see people lose their eligibility, but there are coaches in schools out there that are going to use these rules against their opposition. It's just the way things happen. We don't like to see it. We don't like to talk about it, but it's realistic. And for student athletes not to assume that somebody's going to be hunting them down or hunting down their activities to see if they can't get them in trouble is somewhat ignorant. Do the right things so they can't get you at that point. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, at the end of the day, we always kind of idealize D3 as being about the student athlete, but at the same time, like any other competitive business, there are certain cutthroat measures that happen, and even admissions and financial aid giving more money to certain kids to get them to enroll to their school, even though they may not need it. It happens, but at the end of the day, we want to think of this in the most positive light and to try to set things up in the most positive way so that ultimately the student athlete and their family are put in the best and safest position so they don't end up in these kind of more cutthroat type of measures.
Number 5 kind of goes with number 4 in some ways. Eligibility issues could force schools to vacate wins and championships if schools are not made aware of potential violations immediately. Think UMHB in 2016, and having a player that was later declared ineligible caused them to have to vacate games in 2016 and 2017, including their national championship. So once you pollute the situation because you didn't flag your activity in time for them to take the right measures, you're costing your school, not just you in that situation. You have to be cognizant of if a mistake is being made or let other people evaluate if you're about to make a mistake in that respect. Number 6, contracts between schools and companies could be in conflict with the student-athlete contracts. Let me explain what we mean by that. UMHB, we know for a fact, had 2 student athletes in full jersey, and Texas law says that the school protects or gets to protect their own logo and intellectual property and whatnot out there. And so what they didn't realize when they were doing an athletic gear ad was that they have an Under Armour contract, I believe, at UMHB. And so Under Armour's not going to be happy to see that happening. That's our jersey over there, and you're advertising XYZ brand. That's not right. And so they had to step in and say, hey guys, we got to stop this right now because you're in conflict with that, and we can stop you according to Texas law. Now, they caught it in time, and any ill effects can be wiped out pretty early from it. But nobody really stepped back and thought about that until somebody from the school saw it. We may have called their attention to it on Twitter, I don't know, but there was conversation, and this stuff can happen. And it's maybe embarrassing to see it play out publicly, but you know what? Mulligan to everyone here, because I think it gave us all a good lesson right off the bat about the highs and lows here. So again, looking at these 6 concerns here, JB, just your overall thought on the landmines that we're pointing out.
Well, I think, like anything else, there are consequences to some of these actions, and not all the consequences are going to be great. But I think if there is one sort of positive message to take away from this, is that it's still early enough in this whole Wild West situation that there will be, a certain amount of flexibility and possibly forgiveness.
And JB, a little deviation from our normal set here. We've joined the Zoom generation, at least temporarily here, and it's a good time, we feel, with looking at the concerns, to bring in a very special guest. Louise McCleary is the Interim Vice President for Division III at the NCAA. You might remember my interviews with Dan Dutcher throughout the years, especially on D3Football.com Stag Bowl coverage. Well, Louise is fulfilling Dan's role after his retirement. We miss Dan, obviously, but Louise is doing a tremendous job over there in Indianapolis. Easy for Frank to say. But Louise, tell folks what your role is. And again, thank you for joining us.
Well, Frank, it is a pleasure to be here. I am serving as the Interim Vice President for Division III. I've been at the national office now for about 9.5 years, so I had the pleasure to work with Dan Dutcher, to learn from him. And really, in my role in governance is I work with so many of our committees. I work with our highest authority committee, that's our President's Council, all the way down to our Student Athlete Advisory Committee. And we help our membership guide initiatives, programs, legislation, if they want to support it or not, through the governance process.
So that's a lot of stuff, indeed. But right now, I know a lot of focus is coming on to name, image, likeness, NIL topics. So I want to start off with a kind of a broad question here, because a lot of schools have seemed to be caught off guard this summer with this announcement by the NCAA and some of the states along the way here. Some athletic directors even reached out to us and said this might be the worst time of year for this to have happened, because they have no control over their student athletes to a certain degree during the summer months. I mean, most of them want to care about their tan lines and the beach and everything instead of, NIL policies of their schools. And, can't blame them. It's their time of year. But why did the NCAA pick the summer for this announcement? And I guess what's the response been from ADs and schools at this point? And what are you doing at the NCAA? I think this is the crux of the question, really. What is the NCAA doing to make sure that early errors by student athletes don't cost them and the schools eligibility issues and all the things that come with that? Because that's obviously a huge concern from the folks we've talked to.
I'm happy to answer those questions for you. So regarding the timing, what our membership, all 3 divisions, we were watching many state laws had effective dates of July 1st. And so the division felt that it was very important to provide an NIL policy prior to these state laws going into effect. And therefore, all 3 divisions adopted the current interim NIL policy in late June. So now Division III has been discussing how to allow student athletes to use their name, image, and likeness for more than a year. When the division didn't vote on an NIL proposal this past January at the 2021 NCAA convention, we didn't vote due to some governmental concerns at the time. However, what our membership did say is that they would have a commitment to modernize the legislation to provide NIL opportunities to Division III student athletes at the first opportunity. And that first opportunity ended up being this summer. Now, as in regard to your question about the response from Division III institution, I personally have not heard from many regarding concerns about the timing of the decision. but instead there have been many questions regarding the interim policy. So the NCAA staff has created several resources. They're located on ncaa.org. It includes a question and answer resource, key takeaways, the impact that NIL may have on financial aid, an optional reporting form if institutions want to have their student athletes disclose their NIL activities, as well as educational videos.
Well, Louise, another thing that we've been asked about is, D3, football guys, was to what extent the NIL would potentially affect the largest population of student football athletes out there. I mean, there were some commonsensically that were like, oh, probably won't be as big an issue. I mean, Quinn Meinertz, for example, from the University of Wisconsin Whitewater, had around 1,000, maybe 1,500 followers before he kind of exploded on the national scene when he was drafted by the Denver Broncos. But we're starting to see now over the last couple of weeks that there are a number of players in Division III, for instance, accepting NIL opportunities. What do you think the effect of NIL will be on these Division III student athletes compared to other divisions, other schools? And do you think that the lack of athletic scholarships at this level might actually cause these young people to more proactively seek out these opportunities than maybe some of their upper division counterparts that are kind of being handed to them, like the quarterback at Alabama?
So it's a terrific question. I want to start with our Division III National Student Athlete Advisory Committee has been very active in the NIL discussions the past year. These student athletes, on behalf of all Division III student athletes, and you mentioned it, we have the most in the division. We have approximately 295,000 Division III student athletes, have advocated for student athletes to be able to use their athletic status with name, image, and likeness. They stress that student athletes should have the same opportunities as their student peers. I do think, though, it's too early to tell the impact of this new NCAA policy and the name, image, and likeness state laws in terms of how we'll compare, Division III to the other divisions at this point in time. We do know that many of our Division III student athletes, like other Division III students who don't have to worry about their athletic status, have already started to use their name, image, and likeness. They were social media influencers. They created work products, such as writing a book. And now with the new NIL policy, they'll be able to continue with these activities. And they'll be able to now use their status as a student athlete, including the use of NIL associated with offering private lessons, or as long as it complies with the state law where their institution is located, or with institutional policies if the institution is in a state with no current NIL state laws.
And it's a good point concerning I guess, already existing effect of social media influencing that's going on out there. I've seen a lot more of it as we've seen NIL, the doors open just on Twitch and on Twitter and on Facebook and on Instagram and on TikTok. It's almost frustrating for probably coaches and athletic directors out there to try to keep it all together and not have mistakes made along the way. But that leads to my next question, really. From the student athlete perspective, there are a number of things that can go wrong here if they're even if they believe they're doing the right things. Let me give you an example. I sign on to a clothing company as a student athlete, and not realizing that this company may have some involvement in a gambling industry or some kind of other no-no industry that is against the rules out there. Even worse, that company could sign on a student athlete with ill intentions and use their name, image, and likeness for things that weren't originally agreed to that could frustrate the entire purpose of the situation. How strictly is the NCAA going to enforce the rules against student athletes when their eligibility could unintentionally be at stake in a situation like those? And to what degree will schools be held responsible for those student athletes' actions, especially if the intentions were not meant to be problematic, but ultimately are, again, it's kind of that safe harbor question for a student athlete in a school. What is the effect going to be when mistakes are made? Because they're inevitable.
That's right. And what I'm going to say, really the authority has gone to the local level in terms of the institution, the conference, or the state law if there's one that's in effect for that particular, where that institution resides. So if the NIL activity is not subject to state law or prohibited by the interim NCAA policy, which really is pay for play or impermissible recruiting inducements, the student athlete, what we would recommend is that they should work with either a professional service provider, a lawyer, an accountant, and I would say really their institution, maybe their athletics director, their compliance director, their coach who's been in touch probably with those two individuals, with state law or institutional policies and regulations. Now, as the NIL landscape stabilizes, keep in mind we're, 3 weeks out, 2.5 weeks out, with the adoption of either a federal law or an NCAA legislation. The NCAA at that point will develop and refine the guidance as appropriate.
Okay, Louise, not that we haven't confused our listeners, watchers, or whatever, viewers enough. And I'll have to admit, like, Frank Scott have written this question because it's got lawyer stuff written all over it. But I'm going to be the conduit through which it's delivered. So bear with me here. So something that might affect a non-scholarship division like ours more than NIL is the recent Supreme Court decision concerning benefits by colleges and universities to athletes at least tangentially related to their education or the furtherance of it. So now that the court has stated that the NCAA can't prohibit such benefits and shouldn't have in the past, are you at all concerned about some new wave of benefits being provided that might meet the court's edict, but still might subvert the intentions of the NCAA against pay for play? And kind of in addition, is the NCAA independently reviewing prior rulings against player eligibility, including at the D3 level, to potentially reinstate players and championships affected by the prior application of the rules?
So I'm not a lawyer by trade either. That was Dan Dutcher, but I'm going to answer the question for you. So really what is important, critical really, for the association in Division III is maintaining the amateur status of NCAA student athletes and prohibiting pay for play. That's a priority for us. At the school and conference level, there's still a choice about which benefits to provide students consistent with the institutional policy around name, image, and likeness. So the point is that these benefits are not mandated, but they're permissive. And so really with the interim policy, again, it goes back for the institution to work. Is there an existing state law? Is there an existing state law around name, image, and likeness? We need to make sure our student athletes, if we choose, we're going to go in that direction. If there isn't an existing state law, the institution really can decide what they're going to do in this space of name, image, and likeness for their student athletes.
And Louise, one thing we were talking about before we started our interview, and this kind of goes to our final kind of catch-all question for you as well. We saw, I literally woke up to on Wednesday morning, a quote from A.D. Schumacher over at Wisconsin Eau Claire. And it's something that I think shocks the conscience a little bit. It's something that James and I have talked about on Twitter for sure and pointed out some of the weakness or concern factors that come with NIL, especially with boosters. Boosters have been a problem forever for the NCAA to try to curtail what their effects are against NCAA policies ultimately, and they're always trying to find workarounds to get around it. And then A.D. Schumacher says about NIL, it's, quote, "It's not supposed to be about competitive advantage, as the legislation says, but how isn't it? If I can get a booster club member to sponsor an athlete through their business, and that may be the persuading factor of them coming to Eau Claire instead of going to Whitewater or going to Oshkosh, this is real stuff." It's honest, but it's also a little bit, I guess, nefarious in intention when you get down to it. So with that as the backdrop, we want to give you a chance to speak to student athletes and even the ADs out there at this point about your thoughts about the best practices related to NIL and about what to do if they're facing questions or struggles navigating the new world they're suddenly swimming in without a tremendous amount of guidance yet, especially knowing that ADs out there are sort of aware of maybe the potential workarounds that they can get away with or let their student athletes get away with.
That's right. So I'll start with the first question, Frank. I think everybody, as I said, this is a new landscape for student athletes. Our student athletes, our athletic administrators have been committed to saying, let's provide opportunities for our student athletes to be like their peers who are not involved in athletics, in being able to use their name, image, and likeness and include their athletic status. Can there be unintended consequences with that? Absolutely. I don't think if institutions, I don't know if AD Schumacher was saying we're going to do that. I think he was just noting there could be these unintended consequences. And I believe, and I think our athletic directors believe, as we start to move through this landscape, institutions will work with conferences to say, what is the best way we can still provide opportunities to our student athletes, but in an atmosphere of how we've always cooperated with each other in terms of fairness, et cetera, in terms of competition. But what I would do is I would encourage all student athletes to work very closely, either again with a professional service provider and their athletics department administrators. Having people to provide good advice in this area of expertise is really important. To the extent that a student has a question about the interim NIL policy or a school policy or regulation, their ADs, their coaches, their compliance officers will be the best individuals to assist them if they have an NIL opportunity. I know that many schools and conferences are working hard to provide that guidance to their student athletes. I would also recommend that the students and their advisors access the interim NIL policy resources, the educational resources that we have on ncaa.org, as well as the videos. I think it outlines some key areas in terms, as I mentioned at the beginning of this interview, questions and answers, the impact that they may have on financial aid packages. Also, if institutions say, as we start this, maybe we want all of our student athletes to disclose what they're doing so that they, as you mentioned, that they're getting the right advice and they're understanding how they're connecting their name, image, and likeness to a certain company or endorsement, and they understand all of those parameters.
So you come in the heart of COVID in this role. You come in with NIL basically right after that. I mean, did you sign up for all this really when it comes down to it, Louise? Because this is probably one of the most critical years we've seen in NCAA policy, and especially in how it affects Division III. Because as we've pointed out throughout the last year, COVID does not hit all schools equally. It really doesn't. Division III schools can't afford a lot of the protocols, et cetera, on a permanent basis that some of the Division I schools might be able to ultimately. I mean, give us, I know we're a little off script here, but I see you're doing a great job, a great voice and face for the division, indeed. But, I mean, this has got to be a little frustrating for you to see all this coming at you at once.
So, Frank, I'm glad you actually asked it. What I didn't mention is while I've been at the national office for 9.5 years, I spent 25 years on campus before I came to the national office. 15 of those years, right before I made the transition, were on Division III campuses. I was an athletics director. I've been an associate athletics director. And Division III, the opportunities for student athletes, supporting coaches, athletic administrators is, some have said it's a passion of mine. And so, yes, nobody could have anticipated the pandemic. I think we're close to getting out of it, but I'm not sure we're completely there yet. But how difficult it has been the past 1.5 years for student athletes, for athletic administrators who are helping those student athletes, for coaches. So that we're all dealing with. Name, image, and likeness, it is a difficult time right now. But I believe with any new change, you're going to have those difficulties. And I believe that over time, institutions, state laws, student athletes will find a way to navigate this. And at the end of the day, our student athlete advisory committee always said, we want to have the same opportunities that our peers have. And they had those opportunities, but they couldn't use their status as an athlete. And so I think there's going to be a benefit to that. It's just right now we're at the beginning of so much uncertainty that I think it's hard to see that benefit. And you mentioned it. What I loved about Division III, I've always said, is you can color outside the lines. You're not siloed in your department. But there's difficulty with that because there's so much to do. And so what I love about our division is 450 schools, all slightly different, but we all have a common drive and passion to say, how do we give our student athletes the best possible opportunities? And I know we will continue to work through these challenges together to be able to do that.
Okay, JB, that was a great 20 minutes or so with Louise McCleary from the NCAA, the interim vice president, and hopefully they drop that interim title that we have to keep carrying here because she's doing a great job.
Right. Come on now.
Yep, a great name, great voice and face for the NCAA. I kind of, the things I take away from that and some of the thoughts I have generally, it sounds like they're waiting for federal intervention to a certain degree before they go final on their rules, because I think the NCAA feels the federal rules are going to be sort of more all-encompassing across the country instead of the hodgepodge of state laws. That gives me a certain amount of agita. As an Italian guy, I'll say agita is that bad word for stomach illness or whatever, because, look, the Congress doesn't move very fast. It just doesn't. And so I don't know when they would even get to that point. Maybe there's some legislation they're considering right now in committee, but the ADs out there that have reached out to Louise, it sounds like, are definitely clamoring for more guidance or better regulations, or not so interim in what's out there. And I think their hands getting forced to put out more, to give some better guidance, and to tell everybody what happens when there are screw-ups. Are we going to go full eligibility nixing, or are we going to create safe harbors for the student and the school if they at least show that they tried to do the best things possible in this landscape? I sure hope there's a safe harbor created, because I don't think everything's ill-intentioned out there when it comes to NIL.
Yeah, and I agree. And it's so early on. And for the most part, we've only really seen a handful of student athletes, at least in our division, sign up for deals like this. And it's primarily been actually in the South, sort of Southeast, Southwest, you could say. Not seeing a lot of stuff in the Northeast just yet. Midwest a little bit. But so far, it's still in the early innings. And so I would say, hopefully, that safe harbor, a little bit of grace, period is given to this, since everything is so new and there really isn't a whole lot of guidance out there yet.
Although we've seen some schools come up with good guidance, like Trine's set, we're going to run on the screen right now. The Trine set of 7 or so bullet points is pretty good stuff, to say the least. And now we want to bring in an athletic director. We heard from Louise McCleary that athletic directors have been talking to the NCAA, not necessarily voicing opinions about the summer concerns or the timing of the drop of the information, but just some overall concerns about the policies that are standing right now at the NCAA, kind of the interim set, and where things go from here. Somebody who's been ahead of the curve is Matt Land, athletic director at Trine University. We're going to show on the screen, Trine did put out some, let's say, advanced policy notions for student athletes, and we've been using them ourselves on Twitter. JB, I know you and I have both been tweeting about their policies as they have them set right now, but obviously there's a lot more to come. Matt, first off, thanks for joining us, but kind of take us through why it was so important to you and Trine to get out in front of this to the degree you have.
Yeah, this isn't unique to Trine. It's unique to, I think, Division III, and unique to the kind of people that I work with in Division III. We wanted to get information out to our kids as quickly as possible, just so we could preserve their eligibility to get out in front of it and give them information so we could save them from having to go through a painful process to get reinstated or any of those things. It's so new. It came out so fast. It came out at a time in the summer when we don't have our athletes specifically on campus. So it was important for us to get some information to them as quickly as we can. And as you know, the kids dig Twitter, so that's what we started with immediately. We went out with I think 7 points of emphasis on Twitter really quick. And as we were developing our policy, and then we got our policy up as quickly as we could. And it took our team some time to do it, but I think we got it out. And I don't know if we got it right, but it's a starting point, correct? And 5 days after it was announced by the NCAA, we had something for our kids to go look at and make decisions on, and a reporting structure that allows them to get some information before they step into any NIL agreement.
Well, Matt, we certainly enjoyed over the last year or so getting to know the Thunder. We had Alex Price, your quarterback, on the show in the spring term, and as a guy in charge of running an athletics department, let's say I'm a guy like Zane Kirby, and a hairstyling company really has noticed my long locks. Maybe a wig making company, because that guy has got probably the nicest hair in your conference, maybe in the country at this point. So how do you go about, aside from the yes or no checklist? What do you think are some of the things that, if a student athlete like Zane came to you and say, hey, Head and Shoulders, saw my hair on TV or on a webcast or whatever, and wants to sponsor me, what are some of the advice or talking points that you would review with a young man like him?
Well, first of all, Zane's flow is amazing, and I would encourage Head and Shoulders to reach out to him because it is something special, no doubt. But I think the kids need to understand that they're basically a business now. They may need representation at some point. They have insurance that they'll need to get. They have waivers they'll need to get. They'll have charges of if they're running facilities to do a named camp that they want to use it. They're going to get charged. There's a 3-person rule if you're doing individual lessons, things that they don't talk about. It has to be you, the minor, and an adult with that minor. And taxes. I have a 19-year-old daughter. She doesn't think anything about taxes, and these are real concerns that our kids are not equipped to handle yet because they haven't had those experiences. And these experiences, if they go too fast, are going to be painful. So we have a 7-day delay. They have to come and meet with us 7 days prior to signing anything so we can look at it with them and at least talk about some of those things and get some information to them so they can make the best decision. Ultimately, they're 18-year-old entrepreneurs now. Some of them are 19 or 22, whatever the age is, and we're actively talking to our business department and our marketing department, trying to figure out should we have a class, that talks about these kind of things specifically that kids can take now. Number one, it'd be really interesting to sport management majors and those kind of things, but our athletes thinking about doing some of these things, should they do that? So as quick as this policy came out, it's a long discussion, right? But it kind of hit us in the summer. It brings up a lot of really unique questions and conversations and things that these kids will need when they're 25 or 30, as a normal person, let alone a sponsored athlete or a professional athlete, whatever ends up happening. So we are embracing it. We tend to embrace things anyway. This is what it is. It's a new thing to deal with. It's a great opportunity potentially for some of our kids. And with that, we're the adults in the room. We've got to help them muddle through some of the cobwebs.
Speaking of the adults in the room, some eyebrows went up over the last day or so. I woke up to this, as did I think JB, a friend of ours, sent this to us, and we dug out the article it came from in Wisconsin. AD Schumacher over at Eau Claire stated about NIL, quote, Yeah, it's not supposed to be about competitive advantage, as the legislation says, but how isn't it? If I can get a booster club member to sponsor an athlete through their business, and that may be the persuading factor of them coming to Eau Claire instead of going to Whitewater or going to Oshkosh, this is real stuff. Boosters have been a problem forever. We talked about this with Louise McCleary from the NCAA. You know this as well as I do. You've had a rich, history in terms of coaching and ADing and everything else, and you've seen the boosters try to affect things in ways they probably shouldn't along the way, and you've had to step in probably once or twice, as has any AD out there, to say, no, we can't do that. Thanks, but no thanks. But you now have a certain level of inability to make that step in between the student athlete and the booster potentially, or it may not be as clear to certain schools that it's happening right before their very eyes. Is it a concern? Is this a gotcha moment? Give us your take on when you saw or read that quote or heard it for the first time now, what your reaction was and what you think it all means at the end of the day.
Number one, I don't think I'm the end-all be-all. I don't think our document is the end-all be-all. I don't think the way I read the document is the end-all be-all. It specifically says in our policy that coaches and athletic administration cannot actively recruit opportunities for our student athletes. In my opinion, that statement, again, this is all new, right? So we're going to make mistakes. I may say something on this interview that's a mistake, so athletic director Schumacher, no disrespect, but in our interpretation of it, we should not be actively doing that. That would be a violation because we don't actively look for opportunities like this for regular students. That's just our interpretation of it. This is all going to work out in the wash, right? And as far as boosters being a problem, we've had to have some conversations. We try and do as much education as we can with them. But now this may be a way to embrace them. It may be a way to encourage conversations and relationships with our student athletes if those two meet and that comes up. I don't know yet. Again, we're a week into this. Michigan just signed a deal with the Big M sporting goods store. They can use their uniforms, and they can make custom uniforms, and every player on their roster from 1 to 99 will get paid based on them selling the 1 through 99 number. Not necessarily the name on the back, but the number represents the athlete. So now they have a way right now that using the NLI that all of their kids will get some sort of dollars. If my son's number 7 in high school and I want to buy him the number 7 Michigan jersey, number 7 on Michigan gets a cut of it, and I put land on the back for my son. So, hey, I think it was said best when they called it the Wild West right now. We've had about a week of the Wild West, and really unique things have come out of it. So maybe boosters aren't the boogeyman anymore. Maybe there's a way everybody can be involved in a big hug. We're giving them a hug, and things may change a little bit. We don't know, is it going to get amended? We don't have a state law in Indiana. So our policy is just basically our policy right now until our state gives us some guidance as well. We have a state law in Michigan. Our conference is in Michigan, and we're looking at what we're going to do conference-wide, and then our policy may have to change a little bit. So, again, you can freak out about it. You can choose to freak out about it, or you can choose to embrace it. We're choosing to embrace it, and for all of the problems that it may cause us in the beginning on the front end, maybe it won't as we go, and maybe it will. I don't know. But it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter what Matt Land says or thinks. This is reality. We're in the middle of it, so let's try and make the best of it and make sure that our number one priority is preserving the eligibility of our student athletes. That's got to be where it starts. And if it doesn't start there, then that's when you can get yourself in problems. So we're just trying to put as much protection of our students in this process without saying yes or no, or we have no really ground to stand on to say no. Maybe you can't use our mark, or maybe we don't want you using our athletic facilities to do the shoot, or maybe we do. Those are all different things, but they can do these things.
Gotcha. So we want to give you the final word here, kind of the final 60-second spiel to all student athletes out there, not just Trine, but to all student athletes across the country that are facing NIL questions. What would you say is the best advice, the best practices in a kind of a nutshell scenario here, because there are some facing questions, be it the bar stool scenarios, the elite athletic gear scenarios, and some others that are cropping up now because they've seen their counterparts doing this, and maybe successfully so, at low prices. Stuff that I look at it and I'm like, why would you take that $100 because of the problems that it can cause down the line? But student athletes are doing it across the country. What is your advice?
Learn and read what a 1099 is. Use your own time. You're going to need to know what that is. And before you do anything or sign anything, go talk to your athletic director or compliance officer. All of us care about you. All of us want you to get, in this situation, whatever you can get and what you deserve and those kind of things. And we want you to do I want what you want, basically. All athletic directors want that. But there are several things you need to consider prior to. So before signing your name, before agreeing to anything or taking anything, go talk to your AD, talk to your compliance officer, get some information. I say this to my staff all the time, there is nothing wrong with saying, yeah, I don't know. That's okay. Walk in there and say, listen, I want to do this. I have no idea. What do I need to do? Help me. And that's what we're going to do. At Trine, we are going to help them do the things they want to do. We're going to advise them on a few as well, but ultimately it's their decision. And we're going to support what it is that they want, and we're going to give them the information to protect them and their eligibility.
Thanks to Matt Land for his time. And as I said in the cold open again, it was tough to get an AD willing to come on camera, to be honest with you. And then it just made a whole lot of sense. I was talking to somebody, our friend Lenny Reich, actually. He pointed out, hey, Trine's really ahead of the game with their stuff, because I was asking what AD out there might be willing to come on camera with this, do you think? And I was like, yeah, that makes 100% sense. And Matt right away said, yes, this is too important not to come and talk about the pitfalls, the best practices, etc. Thanks to him for having the courage and leadership to come on our show. We ran it twice now. Let's talk about it briefly. The Schumacher quote. We've asked Louise's and Matt's thoughts on it. It's not a good look. Okay, it may be honest.
No.
But when you read it in full, you're naming your own school as somebody looking to be opportunistic in a way that, as Matt said, goes against what they're working toward here. And then naming other schools that they're competing against to say, if we have the chance to one-up you or trump you with this, we're going to do so. And that makes me uncomfortable. Are you going to work with the student athlete to create these deals? Ultimately, there's a lot in between there that maybe got left out of the quotes, but whatever ran was not something I'm comfortable with.
Yeah, and it pretty much is the antithesis of what Division III is supposed to be about. And like we said at the top, I mean, we know that it's also, a competitive, sort of business of recruiting and all of that type of thing. But this was a comment that probably should have been, reserved to the dinner table, or maybe a beer after the conference or something like that. To publicly state that doesn't show a whole lot of foresight, and it certainly calls into question at least some of the potential motives, and it's something that I think student athletes and their families have to be aware of. If there are schools that are sort of offering this stuff up, maybe take a second look at it, because it's a little weighted there.
I raised the booster issues in a Twitter thread, remember, kind of an 8-parter, but at the end of it was the lesson of if they're offering over market rate for the services being provided by the student in the NIL deal, then it basically can be viewed as pay for play. And it's a reminder that booster scenarios should be under greater scrutiny right now because of that fact. That's what was left out, I think, of his comments, that there should be higher scrutiny now with booster deals. Sure, they could give them true business offerings, the used car salesman or dealer or a new car dealer paying $150, $200 to a student athlete to do a commercial locally. Okay, I can live with that. I think you can live with that as fair. But paying them $2,000 for that same opportunity doesn't pass muster if they don't have name recognition out there. That's the stuff we're looking at, that there are fine lines here, and don't cross them. And as a school, don't assist them in crossing them, because if you do, you're going to get your student athlete in trouble with their eligibility and yourself in trouble as a school. You don't want that. be careful here and sort of march in unison with your colleagues and counterparts out there, not against them. That's my hope. Best practices for all student athletes, let's run some here that we've compiled. These are not an NCAA policy or anything like that. These are just common sense from a lawyer and a business guy out there, a banker essentially, JB is, but things that we have seen and come across as ideas or thoughts for you. Remember, some NIL approaches are universal despite the school or state rule differences. Okay, so that's where these come from. Number one is wait until after your school provides training related to state, NCAA, and school policies in the fall before you seek or accept NIL opportunities. Just wait. What is the urgency here? If it was going to be there for you now, why won't it be there for you in the future if it's meant to be? A lot of these deals aren't worth too much money, and so hold off and tell the folks, I need to do the right thing for me and my school as well, so let's hold off. Also, be prepared to have an attorney review any paperwork you're signing if your school's compliance department cannot assist such a review. Not all schools are going to have the administrative staff necessary to look at every one of these deals. And so you may need your own lawyer out there to help you out and to make sure that you're signing on to the right deal. We keep talking about, JB, hey, I'm going to use you for this car ad, and then they end up using them for something else, their name, image, and likeness, and then say, look, the contract said I could use it. I own this, right here. And you've seen it in your business as much as I have in mine, that you have to be specific.
Absolutely. I mean, it all is going to come down to what's on the piece of paper and what you're signing, and there are. You can go to court over it. There will be money exchange. There could even be, taxes implied or potentially owed, depending on how much money we're talking about. So just be careful.
Yeah, and number 3 would drop down as you said that. Understand that there are tax implications for any money received for an NIL opportunity, and it may require you to invest in greater accounting services. So all that money you think you're making, you got to outlay to basically handle the administrative stuff yourself in this, and that's why number 4 exists. If you don't foresee opportunities in excess of, we say, $500 per year, then don't accept NIL opportunities. They're just not worth the risks and expense. That's what a lawyer reviewing contracts and an accountant or a higher level of TurboTax or whatever you're going to use for accounting services is going to run you at the end of the day, plus the taxes you need to pay for. So if you can't clear $500 in a year, don't do this. It's not worth your eligibility concerns or whatnot, or having to go through all these hoops to make this happen. You're a student athlete in Division III. Emphasis on student. You need to be focusing on what counts there, because this $500 is going to be with 2 extra zeros in terms of your profession later on. Make sure you're not losing focus on what really matters in school. Please. I see too many people making that quick buck mentality, and it's like, take a step back, folks, please. Number 5, ensure that any contracts you enter into can be shared with your school's compliance department in case questions or concerns arise. In other words, do not enter into confidential deals that start confidential from the negotiation phase. If you do that, you're putting yourself in a bind and your compliance department and school in a bind with what they can do to help you in these situations. And I'm going to let you comment on this one, number 6. Don't trust people trying to lead you to, quote, sure thing opportunities you didn't seek out. If you don't recognize the brand or person contacting you, seek more info from trusted sources. You're the guy that I think is out there with the best common sense advice. This is that common sense feeling out there.
Sounds too good to be true. It probably is. There's a saying for that for a reason, Frank, and it's one of those situations where it might sound, good on the face of it, but until you actually, dive in and do the due diligence, maybe talk to a compliance or other professional, just be careful that you really understand what you're signing up for, because all it takes is a little, it could be a division of a company that's got an umbrella corp that's all of a sudden, in the back end, you find out, it also deals with offshore gambling. Well, guess what? You get tied to that, your eligibility is gone, and there could be way bigger implications than you realize.
And JB, this is a good time to bring in our next guest. We talked about best practices, and we heard Louise McCleary even talk about companies that can assist student athletes in schools with best practices surrounding NIL and the issues that it presents. And we want to talk to somebody from such a company. That's, in this case, Lyle Adams, Chief Executive Officer of Spry. And Lyle, for those that don't know what Spry is, and there are other companies out there, we will name one here, Open Doors, for instance, in the same quasi-space that's out there. But this is by no means a full endorsement for any company having you on. We want folks to understand that. But you do provide what some people are terming a valuable service that even the NCAA is giving some credibility to in the discussion. So tell folks out there what Spry is and what they do, or what your company does in the process surrounding NIL.
Thank you for having me, first off, Frank and James. I really enjoy the opportunity to present to you today. Spry is a technology platform focused on the compliance aspects of NIL. As a former student athlete, I knew there were some pitfalls that might arise for student athletes with the ability to earn compensation now. So Spry was created to protect both the institution and the student athlete while providing the student athlete with resources to successfully be their own small business owner.
Wow. And so as a technology company, does this work as like an app on a student athlete's phone? Is it just, hey, I've gotten approached by XYZ company here in my town where I play football or soccer or whatever, and I want some advice? Is it how does the student athlete interact with you via the Spry app or technology that you're talking about?
So right now, Spry has a mobile application for both iOS and Android, and the administrators at the school have a dashboard that they can use now. So per all the NIL legislation and regulations in certain states, student athletes are encouraged to disclose their opportunities. So we work with the school and the athlete to make sure that disclosures meets the state and institution law when applicable, to make sure the athlete remains compliant and, most importantly, eligible.
Lyle, what's the biggest complaint you're hearing from schools so far about NIL and the process that's come of it from the NCAA and the states at this point? It seems like there's a hodgepodge of rules, regulations, laws, etc. going on out there. But I'm curious to see or hear what you're hearing and what you're doing to rectify those types of issues specific to NIL and maybe even specific to Division III.
First off, the Division III aspect. I think NIL personally is for everyone. I was fortunate enough to be a D1 athlete, but if I didn't have the chance to walk on at Wake Forest, I would have gone to a Division II or Division III school in my home state of Florida. So I understand that all athletes will have the opportunity to earn income from their name, image, and likeness. So I think D1 athletes, D2 athletes, and D3 athletes should understand what the rules are. That now brings me to my second point, Frank, that you mentioned is, what am I hearing? There's a lot of, discontent amongst the athletic departments and higher institutions right now about the lack of uniformity in the rules. If you were in a state that had an NIL law passed, you're in a better position than if you were in a state that didn't have an NIL law passed on July 1st, because many of those states now have had to, or institutions have to create their own policies on the fly. And unfortunately, on the D2, D3 level, the institutional resources aren't the same as they are at a Power 5 institution. Your athletic director might be a head coach, or your senior women's sport administrator might do some other job on campus. So getting these policies ironed out and finalized has been a bit more challenging for D2 and D3 institutions, which inadvertently affects the student athlete. Now they don't know what the rules are. They don't want to make mistakes, which only snowballs, what you're kind of hearing right now of people yearning for guidance and education so they can make informed and smart decisions.
Lyle, do you think that there's sort of a kind of a go, no go approach or point with let's say a Division III or II student athlete who's not on a scholarship, where a NIL offer either makes sense or doesn't, because of the fact that income might need to be cleared and through taxes, and attaining perhaps legal counsel to review contracts. I mean, ultimately there will be a certain amount of cost associated with an NIL opportunity for a student athlete. I mean, are companies like yours in a position to sort of do a cost benefit analysis of whether offer A makes sense because of what, at the end of the day, it might only be worth, a couple of bucks?
It's a great question, James. We have tools within the platform, such as the tax estimator, that allows student athletes to estimate the potential tax impact of an opportunity. It's difficult for me to say now what is worth it for a student athlete, but I can only speak to myself as a former student athlete or a college student. Making an extra 30, 40 bucks a week was a lot of money for me in college. So maybe that student athlete does private lessons or a birthday party appearance in college. That might not trigger now the taxable event. I believe it's $600 to file with the IRS, but that could still have meaningful impact. The scenario which you mentioned is something that keeps me up at night for a lot of student athletes, because as we all know, D3 doesn't have athletic scholarships. So many student athletes are on need-based or financial aid from the state or government. And if you now exceed a certain cap or threshold, those benefits could be reduced or eliminated altogether. So for us, we've built tools now working with schools to make sure the athletes are privy to those conversations. We include educational resources of saying, hey, if you're willing to do a 4-digit contract, talk to financial aid before. Because my fear with NIL is athletes make money, but they don't understand the taxes of the money. So now they have to pay taxes next April. And I wasn't great at saving money. I'm not proud of that, but I wasn't great at saving money. So if I did something now and have to pay taxes next April, do I have enough? But more importantly, if this now $2,000 opportunity bumps me to a next tax bracket, will I lose my Pell Grant? Those are the conversations I think we should be educating our student athletes on right now before they now embark in those decisions or contracts. Because for me personally, it would have been a cost-benefit analysis, James, but having that conversation top of mind, I think, is more important. So the athlete knows to have that conversation before they embark in that, instead of having a shock moment next April or March when they apply for financial aid and see that money's no longer there.
Again, for those wondering, I think it was spry.so is the end part of the domain.
Yes, www.spry.so is the website. Feel free to email us at info@spry.so. And to your point, Frank, go ahead, sorry.
I was just going to ask if it could be student athletes or schools that can reach out to you, correct?
Student athletes or schools. We're here to help the industry. I think we're at a really interesting crossroads of collegiate athletics, right? NIL has now or will impact the future of collegiate athletics. So we have two approaches. We can lean in and support and try to work on this together, or we can try to fight it. But what I've seen from my background in technology space, if you lean in and work together, you get to better solutions, like the power of diversity, power of diverse teams and different ways of thinking. So for us, hearing about the challenges that a D3 student athlete might face in a D1 student athlete, or compliance at D1, D2, or D3, allows us to build better products. And at the end of the day, if the product can work for everyone, the product has now achieved its goal. So looking at what we're using today, the internet works for everyone, regardless of what division you're at. So why should not your NIL platform or software do the same? And to the last point, the mention you mentioned about reputation and brand, I think it's really important for a student athlete. College is only 4 years of your life. And you use college to basically launch a career that you will now have for the next, hopefully, 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And as I've now seen personally, it takes 20 years, 30 years to build a reputation or build a brand, but you can lose it in 5 minutes or one tweet or one bad partnership or one negative comment. So student athletes, that's what I want to stress. I don't want to scare you, but saying, hey, will this benefit me now when I graduate college? Am I going to regret doing this deal in 6 months? If you can answer those soundly, you made a good decision. If you can't answer those, or you don't know the answer to those questions in the moment, I would take a step back, think about them before you move forward with anything, because there are some things that you could regret, but hopefully everything that you do now in NIL while in college, you'll look back fondly when you graduate college.
You know, it was interesting to me because we put up the best practices earlier, and then we did the Lyle Adams interview after that. I didn't show him our best practices, but it was very interesting to hear a lot of the same concepts come out of his mouth. And then that discussion about the financial aid concerns, that you may actually adversely affect your financial aid equation. That's a big Division III issue. That's not a Division I issue so much, because obviously you got a lot of scholarship activity going on there. That's not what you have in Division III. You have financial aid and grants that could be adversely affected by the fact that you now have to report this other income, and it could adversely affect how much you get for schooling. Yeah, that quick buck suddenly just costs you money.
Yeah, and it all boils down to basic accounting, which when you look at a document like the FAFSA, it's going to be asking for your family's income, and it's going to look at the family's income versus expenses. It's going to look at the overall cost of the college or university that you want to attend, and there's going to be, sort of just think of a subtraction type of equation. At the end, there's going to be an amount of money that's going to be figured out there, like that the school will have to come up with to make things work. But if all of a sudden you have more income at the very top of the ledger, that number on the bottom definitely will change. So something to keep an eye on. It's certainly something that I hadn't thought of until Lyle brought it up. And it's a really important point, because most Division III student athletes, let's face it, they're on some kind of financial aid. And I think most schools across the country, they advertise anywhere from 50 to 100%, helping kids out for a number of different ways. And whether it's Pell Grants in certain states or institutional grants that's based on academics and so on and so forth. But remember, at the top of the ledger, the income statement, whatever that number is, if it gets bigger, the bottom is going to shrink. So just keep that in mind.
I think if a company like Spry or Open Doors can provide the information, like he's saying, that can avoid those problems, they are worth what they're getting paid ultimately by either the school or the student athlete. I think those are, again, we didn't even think of it. We're right on top of this stuff, and if we are not thinking of it, and they are, they're showing a worth out there. And so, as somebody who doesn't believe always in these companies that pop up as opportunistic in certain spaces, that was something that really hit home for me and gave me a little bit more confidence in these companies. And we're showing on the screen right now both Spry and Open Doors on their websites real briefly here. So, JB, we've heard from kind of the adults in the room with respect to NIL, but let's talk about this with somebody that's experienced it firsthand and who has, I think, a lot of good insight he can provide across the board on NIL. Caleb D-Eagans, who is a senior wide receiver at East Texas Baptist, somebody that is actually getting some draft whispers out there, possibly because of his speed and his ability on the field, but we want to focus especially on NIL today with him. Caleb, we saw you with the Elite Athletic Gear tweets and whatnot out there. Obviously, you took up somebody on their NIL opportunity. We've seen about 4 different ASC football players that have signed up over the last couple of weeks, but you were one of the first, obviously. Why did you choose to do it, and what kind of due diligence did you do yourself with respect to, making sure this was a good idea? Why did you do it, I guess maybe is the best overall question.
Yes, sir. Well, once they reached out to me, the first thing that you do is you got to, research the company. You got to look the company up, see what they're about, see what they're, promoting and things like that. So, because, I've been, there's a couple other companies and, people who's reached out to me and, I look it up and, a lot of times it's just like, I don't really want to, represent that. But, when they reached out to me, first off, they're a Christian-based company. They sell a lot of football gear and things like that. And, it's a lot of, motivational type of things and, inspiration. And so, they reached out to me and I was just like, this is this is a pretty good opportunity for me, especially being, a D3 athlete. And I was just like, this would be, a good way to represent, like the smaller schools. And so, one of the first things I did was, as soon as they reached out to me, I did my research and I knew right away, it was legit. They're a pretty big company. They're based out of New Jersey. And so the first thing I did was I was like, okay, I want to make sure I do everything the right way. As far as, making sure, I don't lose eligibility or get the school in trouble or anything like that. And so first thing I did was, I let my head coach know. I was like, hey, this is a deal. I have this NIL, sponsorship. They they want me to be a part of the brand. This is what the deal, entails. Should I do it? And not only that too, what steps should I take, to go through this? And so basically he was just like, that's a good opportunity. That's a good thing. And the first thing that he did was, he took me right to the compliance guy. And so, and ETBU, I know they was one of the first, actually they were the first non-D1 to sign with Open Doors, and get everything ready, prepare for this. So they were really prepared, and so it was really easy. The process was really easy. So, I let compliance know, they send me paperwork back to fill out, and things like that. And I send it back to them. And I was just like, hey, if there's anything else I need to do, let me know. And so it really went, pretty smoothly.
Well, D-Flash, one of the things that makes you a little different than your average D3 athlete, and you can kind of see that behind the wall there, is that you have played at the Division I level. You've had some experience in that kind of recruiting and type of environment. Did your experience at Texas A&M kind of make you more able to or available or open to this kind of opportunity? Or was it still just like you mentioned, you still had to go through the find out the steps? Because as we've kind of seen across the board with NIL at the moment, there's not a whole lot of rules or structure around it just yet. So tell us a little bit about that experience.
Yes, sir. I would definitely say, being at the Division I level and playing in the SEC and being a part of that, I really do think, that helped, because I saw a lot of things. And not only that too, me being an older guy and a grad student too, is, there's a level of maturity that comes along with it. So, and that's one thing, I feel like is dangerous is, if you have a freshman or you got a guy that's just now coming in and they have these opportunities and they're not sure, how to deal with it, or their purpose for, getting these brands is the wrong way. If they just like, oh, I'm just trying to make a lot of money, and they're young minded, I can see the danger in that. But being an older guy, understanding, what the sole purpose of this NIL really, should really be for and things like that, I think that helps. So I definitely do think my time at Texas A&M, helped me kind of, go through this process.
The D1 versus D3 question we've seen, and JB and I have discussed it internally and externally, what the effects would be comparatively between D1 and D3. A D3 guy has on average, 1,000 followers maybe on Twitter and Instagram, which are the two, I think, most prime places, maybe TikTok these days. A D1 guy has add 2 zeros to the end of that usually in terms of followers on those same social media platforms. Do you think realistically, as this plays out over the next few months especially, this is going to have this big effect on Division III that some people are predicting compared to D1? What do you think the differences are going to be in terms of the effects on each division?
Really and truly, I just feel like that, it's so different, Division I and Division III. I do think it will have some, positive effects on Division III football, and positive as far as just like really bringing attention to Division III football and really, just kind of, putting guys on the map, having people who maybe normally doesn't watch Division III football, maybe them say, okay, this guy just signed, I don't know, a deal with, Vitamin Water or Puma or, something like that. Let's start paying attention to, what they're doing. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Got 2 last questions for you, and this is kind of your spotlight moments, both of them. So sit back, relax, and here we go. First, let's say a random player from Union College, which was my school. That's why I'm using it here in upstate New York.
Okay.
Gets an email from local pizza place that says, "Hey, we want to use you in advertising." What would your advice be to that player right now in terms of what to do from seeing that email to making it come to fruition ultimately, or not? I mean, a lot of these deals may get passed up for various reasons. We've talked about some of the reasons you might not want to do it in this show. But what would your advice be to the player that received that, maybe a freshman or a sophomore in that school or any school? Go ahead. Give us your best practices that you've seen or that you've employed here.
My advice would be, especially if it's locally, first of all, see what the deal really entails. Okay, is it money? Is it compensation? Is it, like you said, it's pizza. So are you getting free food? Are they going to promote you as far as social media, or are they going to take a picture of eating a pizza, and post you? So what does the deal really entail? What do you really want? What are you trying to get out of it? Are you trying to really gain followers? Are you trying to really just promote and shed a light on smaller school, or are you just trying to make money? What's your objective? So once you figure that out, then the next step is you want to have that relationship with your coach, either if it's your head coach or position coach, and just say, hey, this opportunity came about. Talk to them about it. Whether you should do or not. Talk to your parents about it. Or somebody really close. Anybody who's really I'm not gonna say who has common sense, but anybody who's aware of what's going on and things like that with the NIL. And then from there, go to your compliance guy, and make sure whether you accept or you don't accept it. But if you do, just take all the right steps, fill out all the paperwork, let them know what all the deal entails, and and go from there.
Great advice, and I think that the front end of that advice, especially JB, you and I have been talking about the idea that companies could go and run with your name, image, and likeness for other purposes other than what you intended, and so you need to protect that fact up front and make sure they don't do that, and that's part of the agreement ultimately, and making sure that the agreement reads correctly so they can't do that to you and abuse your name, image, and likeness, and hopefully the folks out there that are providing counsel, as you suggest, are going to look out for that, especially for people out there receiving these opportunities. So go ahead.
I know. I was just saying, and just to touch on that too, like for me personally, as far as brands and NIL deals and things like that, and this can be advice for younger guys or anybody else who's going through this, partner with somebody, or if you get opportunity, or if you get a sponsorship or deal, make sure it kind of complements you, who you are as a person. So like for me, like with Elite Athletic Gear, they're really Christian based, really faith based, and it's an inspiring company, and that's I would like to say that's how I am as a person. And so if it's anything promoting, because I know once I talked to Adam and the compliance here, it was just like can't really promote cigarettes, alcohol, things like that, so just really find something that complements who you are as a person. So like you talking about pizza, like if your favorite food is pizza, if you're a pizza guy, if you love pizza, hey, that'd be perfect. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I think that's important too. Find something that fits you, or whatever opportunity that you feel like is you. It's always going to work out. So.
Awesome advice, and we truly appreciate that. You're showing your maturity in terms of, you called yourself an old guy earlier in the interview. You're talking to two 40-somethings here, so I mean, but you're showing a maturity that we can truly appreciate, so thank you for that. The other thing is, I don't know if you've seen this before, being the D1 guy used to be and all that stuff, but we give the student athlete the final word in terms of shout outs to any friends, family, teammates, coaches, etc. that might be watching. Since you are our only student athlete here, you are the only shout outs that we're having on this show. So come on, let's hear it. Caleb D-Eagans.
Well, I'm gonna shout out my dad. Shout out my dad, Rayford Eagans from Jewett, Texas, East Texas. I'm gonna shout out my grandparents, Jewett, Texas. I'm gonna shout out my head coach, Coach Maper, my receiver coach, Coach Wilson, a few teammates of mine, A-Dot. I'm gonna shout him out, Justice Henson, KJ Kelly, one of the young bucks, Anaya. He's a linebacker. He's gonna be nice, but yeah.
Love it. The Young Bucks. I just love this. We always get concerned going in that we're going to end up with a student athlete that's not mature about certain subject matters. But we talked to Adam enough online, and we saw some stuff from D-Flash, and we were like, this guy is pretty good, or pretty adept at discussing these issues. And he really was. I mean, the stuff that he told us, I think, was really good stuff. The advice, his best practices, from student athlete to student athlete, I really like what he had to say, and I think there's value in listening to him. Yeah, he may have been the first out of the box. Yeah, maybe he didn't wait for all the information to come out, but he did go to the right people to make sure he wasn't making a mistake and thought about what the brand represented and what he represents and made sure that was in tandem with each other. Can't fault that logic.
No, and I do think he might be the exception to the rule in the sense that he does have that Texas A&M background and a little bit of Division I experience. But at the same time, now the way NIL is set up, it's gonna be an option for almost anybody at this point. So I think his advice was sound, and you can hear kind of a common theme throughout all the 4 people that we've had on the show. It's basically, do your due diligence, talk to somebody you trust, whether that's someone that you're paying to review documents or just someone who with a background in either the accounting or the legal contract language. And also, work with your coaches and your compliance officers at your respective schools to make sure that you're in the best place possible so that you don't end up in a situation where you're finding out after the fact, I missed a spot or I missed a step, and now all of a sudden my team and teammates are getting impacted from a potentially wrong or bad decision.
Let's put up the 2 slides again, all 6 concerns, and then we'll also put up all 6 best practices that we've come up with here. Again, not exhaustive. It's something from us to you. It is not anything that's been endorsed by the NCAA, but you've heard the common themes throughout the show that I think represent these things. And we're just going to wrap up here to give you the overall reminder. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And be careful with it, because even if it isn't, it could be affecting things that you haven't thought of before, the financial aid question, or just the brand and what it represents versus your own brand, what you want to represent out there. You could be running afoul of your school's contracts and cause issues that way, and then you're put into a real dilemma if you sign a contract that didn't have an out basically for such a situation. You got to be careful and think about these things. There's going to be more guidance coming out there, JB, and if I am a student athlete right now, I keep saying it and I'm going to say it again. Wait till the fall term. Wait to see how this plays out for another month or 2. You don't have to be the next out of the box to do this. And there will be opportunities as seasons develop here, and more regulations and more concepts on what your penalties could be develop as well. Because right now, the assumption is you screw up, you lose your eligibility. Maybe the NCAA creates kind of a better pathway here on what the worst case scenario is and how to get yourself out of the worst case scenario ultimately, if God forbid you make a mistake.
Yeah, I agree, Frank, and I think hopefully that schools and parents, students out there, feel free to share this. You can use it in your preseason camps that are coming up in a couple of weeks. We're excited that we're actually going to be able to have a fall season for the first time in a couple of years, which is exciting, and we certainly appreciate all the parties that were involved in today's show for taking the time and helping us put this thing together for you. And we'll see you. Season 14 coming up pretty soon.
Season 14, indeed. But one thing we should say, we're going to run the full D-Flash interview and the full Spry interview as Twitter solo things later on next week, so that you can hear all the advice and all the conversation. We had to cut them short here because of time and content purposes, but we're going to run those in full next week. So make sure you tune into those if you have more interest in hearing D-Flash's story and or hearing about Spry and other concerns that Lyle had. So we have a lot more where this came from. We just want to make sure we kept this to at least under an hour 15, essentially, this show. I'm not sure how we did. We'll see it in editing. But folks, we'll see you and I, JB, in season 14 when it starts up next month. And I'm excited about it. Let's get back to normal football to the degree it can be normal football. More on that another time. Thanks for joining us.